As promised, it's a visit from our favorite hockey insider. I always say, our favorite when they're on the show. When they're not on the show, who knows what I say about them, right? But here's Dave Poulin. It's great to see you, Dave. The contract negotiations for Mr. William Nylander, according to our Pierre Lebrun, are not going well, Dave. Not going well. And that limited no trade, that limited no move clause kicks in Saturday. So if you are Brad Treliving, how are you handling the next couple of days?
Well, let's look at both sides of this, Jay. I would be stunned 2 days before a major leverage point kicks into gear if somebody said to me, wow, the contract negotiations are going great. I mean, you're not expecting to hear that, because right now, this is a leverage point for Nylander. With July 1st approaching, he has a limited no trade clause that will kick in, and that will give him a little bit more strength in negotiations. But it's not an end point by any means on July 1st. It's simply not. And if I'm in, let me start in Nylander's camp, because that's actually more fun, Jay. I'll start there, and you'd say, okay, let's look for comps for William Nylander. His camp would say, well, we don't have to look very far. We can just look across the locker room. We can look at another right winger on the same team, and his name is Mitch Marner. And by the way, for the last 4 years, he's made $4 million per year more than William Nylander. And during that time, he scored 62 more points. Nylander, in fact, has 21 more goals through those 4 years. So why go to other teams to look for comps? Our comps are right here. And that would be my Nylander pitch, and probably why negotiations aren't going very well. The Leafs have been able to say for the last few years, anytime talk of trading Nylander would come up, they'd say, well, he's such a value, he's such a bargain at that price. If you've said that for 4 years and it's his turn to negotiate, of course he's going to say, I want more. This is tougher on Treliving and the Toronto side, obviously. But they've got to stay within a budget. They've got to stay within a structure. They don't know yet what's going to happen with Austin Matthews. And they do have fixed price for the next 2 years for both Tavares and Marner. But they've got to keep it within the structure of what's going to happen. The cap's only going up $1 million. So it's really tough from the Toronto side. But they've got to look at it and say, we've got to decide if we want to keep this player. But it's not a hard July 1st decision for them. Jay, I would continue to negotiate and continue to want this player on my team, but it's got to be at the right price.
Still blows my mind, Dave, that there was a time when people thought that the Leafs had overpaid for William Nylander on that initial deal. The insiders also made note, Dave, that Brad Treliving will not be buying out Matt Murray on Friday. Therefore, the Leafs will carry, or plan to carry, 3 goaltenders into next season. We assume Murray might be on LTIR for a good portion of the next season, but how do you feel about this potential approach with 3 goaltenders?
Right now, I'm fine with it because one of the goaltenders isn't signed, and that's Ilya Samsonov. So if you were to buy out Matt Murray right now, then that would essentially give the Samsonov camp a little more leverage. I've used that word in both of the first 2 conversations because those are the trigger points. But with Murray under contract and a healthy Matt Murray, it just gives them a little bit more insurance in their negotiations with Samsonov. And Samsonov, I believe they want to be the guy, and I believe they would want Joseph Woll to be their number 2. Even in a short period of time, I think he showed he could be a strong number 2. So I think that's the ideal situation, but why not keep the insurance policy when you can continue to do that?
I think it makes sense. Now, Kevin Cheveldayoff is finding the market a little difficult in terms of trading Connor Hellebuyck. Connor Hellebuyck wants Andrei Vasilevsky money. I think if you're in Connor Hellebuck's camp, you have a pretty good argument why he should get Andrei Vasilevsky money. But I'm curious to get your thoughts about this, Dave. Do you think he deserves that kind of cash? And would you pay $9.5 million for Connor Hellebuyck if you were an NHL GM?
It's going to be very hard to do that next year with the cap for anybody. There's only 2 goalies who make $10 million a year. One of them is Carey Price, makes 10.5 and won't be healthy to play. Bobrovsky makes 10, your favorite guy, and Vasilevsky makes 9.5. And then it drops off dramatically down into the 6s for an AAV. And so no one else is paying that kind of money. And I believe there are 8, maybe 9 goaltenders that can be in a conversation with Connor Hellebuyck, but they're all priced lower. And so that's a bit of an advantage for Kevin Cheveldayoff. But if Connor Hellebuyck, in fact, wants out and doesn't want to re-sign and they want to push that, that's the problem, is finding a dance partner that's willing to pay that. It also says that if they're not willing to pay it in a trade, would they be willing to pay it on the open market? And that strengthens Winnipeg's case a little bit. So these negotiations are so complicated because there's so much projection involved, particularly with a year out and not understanding exactly where the cap is going. I would be comfortable making Hellebuyck one of the top paid goaltenders in the league. I would argue that I would rather, pay Vasilevsky more. So would he come in under 9.5? But somewhere in the 8s would be a comfortable number for me for Hellebuyck.
I would think that would be pretty fair. We saw some straight salary dumps on Thursday, including the Oilers sending Kyler Yamamoto and Klim Kostin to Detroit. We're going to get to the Oilers side in a minute. But do you think the acquisition of Yamamoto might affect the Wings' potential acquisition of Alex DeBrincat? Because we know, Dave, that for as long as DeBrincat's been on the market, it appears that Detroit's been the front runner.
Well, he's from the area. They're a young team that needs more goal scoring. And this, essentially, at no cost, does give Stevie Yzerman another talented young offensive goal scorer. Now, Yamamoto has only scored 20 goals once in the National Hockey League. DeBrincat, a 2-time 40-plus goal scorer. So he's produced at a much higher level. He's a year older. And being from the area, it looks like it's a fit from both sides. It makes sense. But you've still got David Perron there, an elite goal scorer for Detroit. And you've got a couple of guys coming. You've got Lucas Raymond. There's another name, Marco Kasper, that's only 18 years old, who played a game last year coming over from Rögle in the Swedish league. And he's a winger as well. So you don't want to cloud things up too much. And I think that's why Stevie Yzerman, if he were interested in DeBrincat, for me, the price just went down because he said, look, I might not even have room for him. And if we are, in fact, the market that he wants to go to, it has to be on our terms to work both in the players that we have and in whatever cost it takes to get Alex DeBrincat.
Let's talk about the Oilers side of it now, Dave. That trade of Yamamoto not only opens up some cap room that the Oilers desperately need, but it opens up a spot in their top 6. And for the longest time, I mean, it seems like forever, we have been linking Connor Brown to the Edmonton Oilers because of his history with Connor McDavid and Jr. and the fact that it seems like it would be a terrific fit. Do you like that potential fit, Connor Brown going to Edmonton and reuniting with the other Connor?
I do like the fit in Connor Brown going to Edmonton, a healthy Connor Brown. He only played in 4 games last year with Washington. But I'm not sure that he's a top 6 guy at this stage of his career. I see him better served on the third line. The name you might slide in there might already be in Edmonton. That's Dylan Holloway, the talented young power forward. But I don't know that Connor Brown can produce at the offensive level. It would be almost in more of a defensive mode that he would fit back in. He hasn't produced at that level that he did in junior with Connor McDavid, and he was an elite goal scorer back then. I think he's more of an all-around player. Would I want him on my team? Absolutely. I don't think he's a top 6. I think he's better served, be a perfect third-line player for Edmonton. I'm not sure that's what they need.
All right, and then Ken Holland, the Oilers GM, said after the draft that Evan Bouchard would likely have to come back on a bridge deal. We don't see many bridge deals anymore, Dave, in the National Hockey League, and yet with everybody up against the cap, and it seems like every single team is, except for maybe Chicago and Arizona. Do you think we're going to see some more bridge deals in this current cap situation? As you mentioned, it's basically going to be flat again next year, maybe go up by $1 million.
I do, Jay. I think this is going to become something, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see players pushing for bridges more often and to put themselves in control of the situation. Now, it's a risky thing. If you offered me 8 years or 2 years, now that's a question of security, and at those numbers, it's money, it's legacy money for your family and for your future. But in terms of rolling the dice and maximizing what you're making, you could see more short-term bridge deals, particularly with the unknown on the cap here. And we're still coming out of a pretty flat cap over the last couple of years. And while they've maneuvered their way through it, it was largely on contracts that were negotiated before the pandemic. And those are still lasting. But I think it's going to be hard on this next group coming up. There's simply no money in the market. And it's really hard to create it. We've seen how hard it is to create, to even move money. There's only a couple teams, and you mentioned them. And I'm not even sure they're willing to take on hollow contracts. They took on in Chicago at Taylor Hall. Yeah. But that was for the player. It wasn't for an empty contract.
That's true. That's true. Hey, we've been talking about Fred VanVleet all day. The bet on yourself theory worked for him. Maybe it'll work for the NHLer out there as well. Dave Poulin, I hope you have a great weekend. Great to talk to you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jay.